All right, in just a few moments, we're going to take you to the White House, where just moments ago, President Trump spoke to reporters ahead of his trip to the NATO summit in London. He was, of course, accompanied by First Lady Melania Trump. The president was asked some questions with regards to the upcoming hearings. Argentina, the devaluation of their currencies. Let's listen.
It has not been a fair situation for us because we paid far too much. As you know, Secretary Stoltenberg said that we were responsible. I was responsible for getting over $130 billion extra from other countries that we protect that weren't paying. They were delinquent. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about a lot of things. We are leading the world now in the economy, and we have been almost since I became president. But we're substantially ahead of anybody else. Nobody's even close. You know that very well. And I look forward to having a number of very, very productive days for our country. We'll be working hard. Do you have a question? Yes, sir.
Afghanistan.
Well, it doesn't make it better. Well, we'll see what happens.
Mr. President.
So the Democrats, the radical left Democrats, the do-nothing Democrats, decided when I'm going to NATO, this was set up a year ago, that when I'm going to NATO, that was the exact time. This is one of the most important journeys that we make as president. And for them to be doing this and saying this and putting an impeachment on the table, which is a hoax to start off with. If you notice, there was breaking news today. The Ukrainian president came out and said very strongly that President Trump did absolutely nothing wrong. That should be case over. But he just came out a little while ago and he said President Trump did absolutely nothing wrong, and that should end everything. But it will never end it because they want to do what they want to do. They're getting killed in their own district. I think it's going to be a tremendous boon for the Republicans. Republicans have never, ever been so committed as they are right now and so united. So it's really a great thing in some ways, but in other ways, it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace for our country.
Afghanistan, please.
I love going to Afghanistan. It was great meeting with, as you know, we had some very good meetings with a lot of people, including Ghani. You know that, right? And he was terrific. It was great meeting with him. But my trip to Afghanistan was very successful. Now we're going to London, and it'll be NATO, and we're meeting with a lot of countries, and they're going to have to do a little more burden sharing.
Any reaction on this year?
Say it.
Is the China trade deal still possible this year?
The Chinese are always negotiating. We are, and frankly, I could be other places that I could do all by myself and be even happier. And you understand what that means. But the Chinese want to make a deal. We'll see what happens.
Brazil, your tweet this morning. What was the kind of thought process?
Well, Brazil has really discounted. If you take a look at what's happened with their currency, they've devalued their currency very substantially by 10%. Argentina also. And I gave them a big break on tariffs, but now I'm taking that break off because it's very unfair to our manufacturers and very unfair to our farmers. Our steel companies will be very happy, and our farmers will be very happy with what I have.
Why don't you send one of your lawyers to represent your point of view before the House impeachment inquiry?
Because the whole thing is a hoax. Everybody knows it. All you have to do is look at the words of the Ukrainian president that he just issued, and you know it's a hoax. It's an absolute disgrace what they're doing to our country.
Mr. President, Mr. President,
All right, we've just been listening to the president speak as he's on his way to the NATO summit in London. Let's bring in CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe now to talk a little bit about what the president had to say. I guess there's nothing particularly surprising from the president. And, you know, one of the criticisms that we heard from the White House is that this hearing, sort of the next stage in the impeachment inquiry with the Judicial Committee, you know, Wednesday is actually some pretty bad timing.
Right, but remember that Wednesday's hearing is actually more of an academic exercise. It's literally going to draw constitutional scholars and other legal experts to talk about sort of what is impeachment or what could conceivably be seen as an impeachable offense. As we look at the president here live at Andrews, Joint Base Andrews, about to board Air Force One with the First Lady. What we heard from him there a moment ago was just tape playback. And here he leaves now to go to London. But his point was, why would you hold this hearing on a Wednesday when I'm going to be at NATO, that you know has been on the calendar for several months, if not about a year? But he's getting worked up about something that really doesn't necessarily count towards his actual, or the potential impeachment of him. It's going to just be a discussion with invited witnesses by the Democrats and Republicans to talk about what exactly impeachment would look like. The question is, does he show up at the next hearing after that, which could be as early as this week, if not the following week? And that's where they may begin discussing articles of impeachment and perhaps specific charges against him. He has until Friday to have either himself or his attorneys respond to an invitation from the Judiciary Committee to appear or to decide whether or not he would actually send lawyers or seek to call witnesses and defend himself in person. We tried asking him whether he would show up himself. He didn't either hear that or decide to answer it, but you saw there one of the last questions was, why not send your attorneys? And he says, well, the whole thing is a sham. So, important turning point here for him. Does he perhaps present a defense for himself through his attorneys, or does he continue to ignore the proceedings and suggest that they're illegitimate? And does that potentially add to the Democratic calls for him to be impeached because he's continuing to impede Congress's ability to consider this issue?
Right. Speaking of the NATO trip, do we know what's on the president's agenda?
Well, among other things, we know the administration has said that they're considering curtailing the amount of money that the United States actually pays into NATO, again, arguing, as he has for the last several years, with some effect, that other member nations need to be putting up their end of the bargain. While the United States pays a considerable amount, billions of dollars into NATO, other member nations are not doing so. So we expect that that will be part of the discussion this week. We don't expect him, at least as of now, to hold a meeting with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who, of course, is in the midst of an election himself to determine whether or not the Conservative Party will continue to maintain power over the United Kingdom. There's an election there in the next few days. So a sensitive time in domestic politics. But otherwise, he's expected to hold meetings with various member nations over the course of the next few days. And, you know, one thing to watch for, you may have seen, Anne-Marie, in recent days, the French President Macron has argued that NATO is suffering a brain death because the United States isn't necessarily living up to its obligations, or there's a concern that it might not, were a member nation to be attacked. We'll see whether or not the president reinforces the United States' adherence to Article 5, the idea that if one member is attacked, all members must respond, or whether he perhaps leaves a little wiggle room. If he were to do that, certainly would cause great consternation on the other side of the Atlantic.
You mentioned Boris Johnson, you know, heading into an election, and I'm wondering if you've seen any reporting that perhaps Boris Johnson is a little more sensitive about appearing with President Trump, particularly because of that, because it may not be advantageous to him.
Well, the fact that no meeting has been arranged, at least not yet, or at least no formal meeting, is perhaps a suggestion, yes, that the Johnson government is a little concerned about that. But what's not to say that there wouldn't be some kind of informal conversation, as happens at these meetings. That's the whole idea, right, that the leaders of these countries get together and perhaps chat a little bit. We tried asking the president about whether or not he thinks Prime Minister Johnson should stay on. Again, we didn't get a chance to ask him that either. But we'll see. Undoubtedly, he's likely to weigh in at some point here in the coming days.
And let me just ask you about a little bit of sort of news of the day. The announcement that steel from Argentina and Brazil, that the tariffs are going to be reimposed there. He said it was hurting the farmers. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah, it's essentially an administration concerned about currency manipulation. Because the Brazilian currency dropped last week, he now says that they're going to reimpose these tariffs on Brazil and Argentina. Both of those nations have responded this morning by saying that they'll try to seek some conversation with the president or other trade representatives here in the United States to try to sort that out. But it continues to feed the president's desire to really shake up trade policy. And these conversations with the Brazilians and Argentinians now come, of course, as the White House is waiting for Congress to act on on that new NAFTA deal. Whether or not Democrats in the House especially will finally take it up and approve it and give essentially the president a win, but also allow themselves to say, look, we've renegotiated what was NAFTA in a deal that actually looks a little more favorable to Democrats than Republicans. Republicans have been calling on Democrats in the House to take it up, and we expect to get some word this week as the House reconvenes as to whether or not there will actually be debate over that bill in the coming days. Remember, Congress has about 3 things that have to be done over the next few days. Keep the lights on past December 20th, which sounds easy, but these days isn't. And given that they only have a handful of legislative days left in this month, it'll be tricky to see that happen amid the possibility of a vote on the new USMCA, U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And then, of course, impeachment and what exactly the House decides to do with that.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much.